All right, let's start. Let's start. So, hi everyone. My name is Blessing, and I am a student at Drexel University, studying information systems. Um, I see myself as a global citizen, which I'll talk a bit about that later on, about like where I'm from, how I identify myself, things like that. But this session is called Putting the Personal into Personal Branding. So in this session, I'm going to talk through, my experience with personal branding, online as well as offline. So using LinkedIn to build my personal brand, but also offline, trying to carry on that narrative. So I wanted to start off with talking a bit about my story, because I think this will lay like a great foundation for everything else that's to come, and it will kind of give you a bit of credibility as well as for what I'm about to say. So I don't know if you guessed, but by my name is Blessing Adogame. I was born in Nigeria. I lived there for just under 2 years. And after 2 years, my family and I relocated to Germany. So for the first, I guess, like from the age of 2 to 7 or so, I lived in Germany in Bayreuth, which is a very small city. Um, and so I lived in Germany. I was brought up as a German. My first language was German. And then after the age of like 6, 7, I moved to Scotland in the UK, in Edinburgh, where I spent 10 years of my life before coming to the United States for university. So as you can tell, in the past, I guess like 21 years of my life, I have lived in four completely different places in the world. And so that has really helped me to understand one, like who I am and also what I bring to the table. But yes, Jacqueline, that's my accent. Sometimes you'll hear a bit of Nigerian, sometimes German, sometimes Scottish. So it's a bit of everything. So hopefully you can keep up with that. But yeah, so moving around a lot of different countries, I went through an identity crisis because I could never, when people would ask, like, let's say if you're meeting someone new and they're like, oh, so where are you from? Sometimes people won't necessarily know by my accent. So I would always hate having to go through my entire life story, say, I was born in Nigeria, but then I grew up in Germany. But wait, after that, I lived in Scotland before coming to America. So I went through an identity crisis. I didn't know who I was. I didn't know what I really brought to the table. I thought that my atypical background was actually a disadvantage until I realized that I could turn it into my advantage. It's something that not everyone could say that they've done. It's one thing to visit a country like on holiday or like vacation, but it's a completely different thing to actually live in a country, to set up your foundation there, only to move a few years later. So that's like the unique perspective that I bring from all of the different countries that I've lived in. And with that, I always like to say that the constant in my life has been change. I anticipate change. I'm always thinking of, okay, what's next? Am I going to move? Am I going to move country? Am I going to move city? Am I going to move schools? That's kind of just how I've grown up, just anticipating change. And so when it comes to personal branding and even professional development, it was the last thing on my mind. It wasn't necessarily something that in high school in the UK or in Scotland, sorry, I thought was really important. They didn't teach us about that. It wasn't until I came to America that I understood and I realized that, people are really interested in what they call internships. I didn't know anything about internships. And so, after living in the UK for 10 years, I moved to the US in the last year of high school. So as you can imagine, you're in your senior year of high school, you're not only moving high schools, but you're also moving context. So you're moving continent. And so that was really difficult for me because I just thought that, all the plans I had, all the grades I had acquired, all the plans I had to pursue higher education were just thrown away. So I had to basically start from scratch in America. And so hopefully, through what I go through, sorry, I'm hearing the video signal is a little degraded. Okay, hopefully that picks up. But yeah, so through this experience, I've been able to I've been able to understand one, who I was, and being able to like build my personal brand on that basis. As Jacqueline said, like my global experience is a superpower, but it wasn't until recently that I actually realized that. So I wanted to share a bit about my LinkedIn story. Many of you might know LinkedIn. It's a professional platform. It's a platform that professionals use to connect, to build their network, and to find opportunities, to find jobs. And so I wanted to share a bit about my story, because I honestly I stumbled upon LinkedIn. It wasn't something that as a freshman in university, I thought I really needed to be on. I didn't understand why students should even be on LinkedIn. And that's something I'm going to talk a bit about later on. So in my sophomore year, in my second year of university, I did a co-op, which is basically an internship for 6 months. I worked at a small startup in Georgia, in the US, and my task as a second year in college was to teach professionals how to use LinkedIn, which is a professional platform. I was tasked with that as someone who did not know anything about LinkedIn, as a student myself. And I saw that as a challenge, because I started to think, who am I to teach a professional how to use a professional platform when I'm barely just, in college, in university. And so again, I took that as a challenge. And that's how I was able to explore my way to my personal brand, because I was curious to think of ways to make that experience better for me. For 6 months, I was teaching professionals how to use LinkedIn. And I thought to myself, why can't I teach myself to use LinkedIn? I wanted to go above and beyond. I wanted to do more than what my 9 to 5 required of me. So that's how I was able to explore my way to my personal brand. And as I was able to take the information that I was giving out to other people, to professionals per se, I reeled that information in. I started up creating content on the platform. I started to upgrade and update my profile, and that is how I was able to like build my personal brand. And I like to say that I was able to build the foundation of my personal brand based on a gap that I saw in the market. The gap that I saw was that not many students were actually on LinkedIn. And again, to answer your question, Jacqueline, that's how I was able to doubt the default, because the default for me was seeing that LinkedIn is strictly for professionals. But I started to doubt that. And that's what made me curious about the platform, because I thought that, for the most part, before you're a professional, you are a student. So why is this platform only for professionals? And how can I create, or how can I help foster a pipeline so that as a student, when you're in college, you're already starting to establish your personal brand, so that when you get into, corporate America, or when you get into the industry, it will just be a matter of sustaining. It will just be a matter of maintaining that personal brand. And again, as someone said, personal branding is really important nowadays. It's the currency. We're living in a digital world. Everything is happening online. So it's important to have that online presence. Though I do understand that, a lot of people aren't comfortable with putting their full selves online, which is fine too. So yeah, that's how I was able to build a foundation based on a gap in the market. I found that not many students were on LinkedIn. So I wanted to create a small solution to that problem. I was able to create a community on LinkedIn called Students of LinkedIn, which was there to empower, to educate, and to expose students to the power of LinkedIn. And that was my first introduction to personal branding. I was talking out of experience. I was talking out of theory. And I think both, go hand in hand, and both are just as important. So that's like my background. That's the credibility that I wanted to share with you guys before I actually go into this topic. So this brings me to the motivation behind this session. Again, the session is called Putting the Personal into Personal Branding, or back into personal branding, because I think a lot of people have forgotten about that. And so, as I've been on LinkedIn for the past 3-4 years, and as I was able to, teach other students and even professionals about personal branding and building that online presence, I realized two problems. One, people were trying to build upon a like foundation of their personal brand that could easily crumble. And two, people were thinking about, the way they were thinking about building a personal brand was, on a foundation that was not true to themselves. So again, it could easily crumble. And so this is the motivation behind this session, because I realized that as much as you spray, impressive keywords on your LinkedIn profile or even on your resume, at the end of the day, it's your personality and your character that ultimately reveals itself. It shines through at the end of the day. And I realized this last summer when I was interning at Morgan Stanley. And so I was commuting throughout New York. I was using the metro system. And as I was sitting in the metro, I was looking around, and I could only see people for who they are. I could only see, the person that's wearing a suit, the person that's wearing a dress, the person that's wearing like a tracksuit, and that's all I could tell about them. And so at that point, I realized that I did not need to know the person's title or their achievements or even their status. The first thing that I see about a person is, how they present themselves. It's about who I see them as. It's about who they are. Before I know their title, before I even know their name or their achievements. So I think where a lot of people have started to understand things in the wrong sense when it comes to personal branding is because they build their personal brand on the basis of their titles, their achievements, their status, what they do, rather than who they are first. I think the foundation is the most important thing. If you build your foundation to your personal brand on what you do or the company that you work at, when those things disappear, then people could say that your entire personal brand disappears. And I think with COVID-19, a lot of people are realizing that a lot of the things that they have attached or they tie their identity to can easily be taken away. So at the end of the day, what are you left with? And that's why I say in that last sentence that once we look past your title, your achievements, and your status, we just see you. It is only you that we see. On the metro, if I see a person in a suit, I can't assume that they're a CEO. I can't assume that they're even working. I don't know much about them, but it's just them that I see. So it's important to understand that the who in personal branding comes before the what. The who is the foundation and the what builds upon that. So I wanted to break down, the phrase personal branding. I think for me to understand certain terms, I need to break it down to like the root words. So I'm breaking it down. So first we want to talk about personal. The first definition that I came across when it comes to personal is of, affecting, or belonging to a particular person rather than to anyone else. And I highlighted the word belonging here. The second definition is of or concerning one's private life, relationships, and emotions, rather than matters connected with one's public or professional career. Now, again, obviously, I can't use the word as a definition in itself, but as you can see, when it comes to talking about all things personal, it's about belonging, it's about your private life, it's about relationships, it's about emotions, it's about you. The common denominator is you. It's a personal matter. And I think that's what people almost like take away or don't really consider, don't add much weight to when it comes to the equation that is personal branding. They think it's branding in the business sense, but when you add personal, you have to realize that it's about, your belonging, it's about your emotions, it's about your relationships, it's about your life. And of course, the second word is brand. So branding here, obviously the definitions are more to do with like a business context. So the first definition is that branding is a particular identity or image regarding or regarded as an asset. And the second one, again, it's more of like a business definition, but branding is a promise to consumers. Now, if you want to think about it in a social aspect, you can say that branding is a promise to the world. It's a promise of your value to whoever you interact with. It's a promise of value to whoever hears your name or whoever buys your book or whoever goes to your website. It's a promise. And going back to the first definition, I talk about it being your identity and your image. And it's important to understand what identity and image are. Identity is who you are. Image is who you want people to see you as. So it's important that you know your identity before you try and portray your image. A lot of people who are building their personal brand are building their personal brand upon what they think people want to see them as, not portraying who they actually are to the world. So I think it's important to understand, the specific words in their own context. So now, as we bring them together, personal branding, honestly, there are so many definitions of personal branding online. So it's important to, again, like, as I said, like, dissect the words, understand it for yourself, and then bring the words together and create a definition based on that. This is a definition that I honestly really loved. It says that personal branding is the effort to communicate and present your value to the world. I found that so powerful. And if you take away, some of the filler words, you see these 5 words that I think individually hold so much weight. Effort, communicate, present, value, and world. It's about the effort. It's about how determined you are to do something. It's about communicating. Communication is an exchange. It's an exchange of knowledge. It's an exchange of information. Present. How do you present yourself to the world, right? Are you present? Value. It's about when you talk about value, it's about what can you bring to others that benefits them, and then world, obviously it's understanding things from a larger perspective, from a different perspective, knowing that it's not all about you. It's about, everything around you and how you influence that, how you influence your circle, how you influence the people that interact with you, or the people that hear your name, or the people that hear your story. So I like to break down, personal branding into these 4 categories: who, what, why, and where. So who, as I talked about, it's so important to understand who you are. Go back to the roots, go back to your origin. Who are you? Because it's important to build your personal brand on this foundation so that no matter how the trends shift or society changes, you are strong and you're rooted in who you are, and you do not shift with the wind. It's important to know that with your personal brand. The second one is what. What do people say about you, especially when you're not in the room? Your personal brand, you can understand when you have a strong personal brand when your name carries more weight than your actual presence in a specific area. So we see that with a lot of influencers and celebrities nowadays, where we personally don't need to know them, but if someone tells me about, Michelle Obama, I don't know her personally, but I know her value, and that is the product of her personal brand. The why. Why do people say what they say about you? Again, there are 2 types of people. There are people who actually know you, and there are people who know about you. So it's important to also understand where are you putting the weight to? Are you putting weight to the people that actually know you and what they say about you, or people that don't know you and say things about you? So you need to understand, why do people say what they say about you as in respect to your personal brand? Is it because they've had is it because they've had interaction with you? Have they benefited from one-to-one connection or conversation with you? Or is it because they just know of you? Is it because you wrote a book or you did a webinar in which, just from hearing your story and hearing your experience, that's how they were able to relate. That's how they were able to benefit from that. And lastly, where. So where are you communicating your value? Again, communication is a big part of it. This can be seen as offline and online. I think the thing that I want to point out here is that it has to be consistent. You cannot present yourself as this person online, but then offline you're someone else. That just means that your personal brand is not reliable. How can I trust your online self, but then offline I can't trust you? I don't even know who you are offline. So that's why it's important to think about all these things holistically and understand that our personal brand is who we bring out. It's who we are fully. Who do you bring out? What value do you bring to the world? So I think for me, in my journey in personal branding, it comes down to these 6 categories, which I like to say are some of the key ingredients to building your personal brand. Again, this is really focusing on the personal part of it, because a lot of what I've seen nowadays is that people are trying to automate, people are trying to create a system around what's supposed to be personal. And as humans, we relate to stories, we relate to people being vulnerable, we empathize with stories, we empathize with experiences. So that's really how I've been able to build my personal brand. And I want to walk through these 6 categories. So personality, potential, passion, pain, people, and presence. So as I go through the next 6 slides, definitely feel free to take a picture or write these questions down so that you yourself can introspect after the session. You can understand for yourself who you are. Personality. I think this is important, very important. The question I pose to you guys is, what characteristics and qualities make you you? As you can see, the root word of personality is literally personal. And if you go back to the definition that I shared earlier, it talks about belonging. It talks about life. It talks about relationships. It talks about emotion. So your characteristics and your qualities are specific. They have to be specific to you. So it's important to understand what characteristics and qualities make you you. This is something that you can think about yourself, but it's also important to ask your friends, your families, anyone else, because again, this is where consistency comes in to play. I could say I'm funny, but the consensus of my 10 friends could say I'm not funny. So it's important to not just rely on who you say you are. Obviously, that's a foundation, but making sure that what other people say about you is consistent with what you say about yourself. If that's not the case, then you have to understand what is the disparity, what is not connecting, and you have to figure out, because honestly, it's your responsibility. So you have to figure out, how do you fill that gap? Because sometimes it's just that people don't know you. So again, your characteristics, your qualities, who are you? What makes you you? What makes Blessing Blessing? What makes Lindsay Lindsay? What makes Shemaine Shemaine? Yeah. Let me see. And feel free as we go through, if you have any questions, we can have a Q&A at the end. Okay. I talked about personality. The next thing is pain. And the question I pose to you is, what pain have you experienced? And I'm not talking about physical pain. It could be emotional. It could be mental. It could just be an obstacle or a barrier that you faced. As I told you earlier in this session, the pain for me was having moved to multiple different places in the 21 years of my life. That was my barrier. That was my obstacle that I didn't necessarily know how to overcome. But this is now a story. It's now an experience that I can share with the world. It's the value that I bring, because I bring the perspective of my Nigerian self, my Nigerian background, my German background, my British background, and my American background. That's the value I bring to the world, and that's how I'm able to relate to people. So understanding what pain you have gone through and realizing that pain is still part of your purpose. In the season that you experience the pain, it might have felt, overwhelming. You might have felt really down, but you got through it. And this is a pain that you can repurpose to share your story so that it could help other people, or it could prevent other people from going through the same pain. So it's important to understand that your pain is just as valuable as anything else when it comes to your personal branding. The next thing is your presence. This is so important. As I told you, it's not just about your online presence. Again, your online presence is a currency, but it's just as important to make sure that you're consistent offline. If someone meets me in the street right now, I need to show them the same personality, the same qualities that I show online. Otherwise, people will not trust me, right? Personal branding is about a promise. It's about trusting. So my question to you is, where have you established your presence? Again, not everyone is comfortable being online. That's fine. But personally, if I meet you in the street, or with your spheres of influence, or on campus, or with your colleagues, what do they say? What do they have to say about your personal brand? What do they have to say about you as a person? It's important to understand that your presence also has power. So next is your potential. Your potential is the capacity, or is either having or showing the capacity to become something more in the future. A lot of people, when we think about future, we think 5 years, 10 years down the line. Future for me is anything outside of the present or forward from the present. It could be 10 minutes from now. It could be tomorrow. It could be tonight. So I think when it comes to potential, my question to you is: have you realized your potential? A lot of people do have potential. They don't think so, but they do. It might just be locked up. It could be stored away. It could be pushed to the side. But you have to realize that you do have potential. And it's your responsibility to unlock that potential, to realize it, and then to act from that. Again, to go back to my personal experience, again, as a student, I thought, who am I to teach professionals how to use a professional platform? I had the potential as a student. I am still a student. I'm in my senior year. I'm still a student, but I had the potential. But again, I could not be speaking to you right now if I thought that I didn't have the potential, if I didn't act on the potential. So it's important to understand, okay, I might not have acted on my potential, but knowing that you have potential is the key to success. Another one is passion. Another word that I like to interchange with passion is curiosity. What piques your curiosity? Again, for me, when I got on LinkedIn, some people could say my passion was to help students, but I was just curious as to why on a professional platform, students didn't feel comfortable to be on the platform or to even reach out to professionals or to alumni. So that's what was my passion. That was what I was curious about. So when it comes to your personal brand, you have to understand that, or you have to think about, at least, what am I curious about? That's ultimately what's going to drive you. That's what's going to be your fuel to continue building upon your personal brand. Personal branding is not something that you establish once. You have a LinkedIn profile, you have a website, you have like a logo, and then that's it. You have to keep watering it. It has to keep going. The other thing is people. A lot of people try to think, it's personal branding, it's personal. Yes, that is true, but it's also about the people that you are surrounded by and are surrounded by you. So it's important to ask yourself, who needs me and who do I need? As a personal brand, as someone who's passionate about helping students, I need people to pour into me as much as I'm pouring out to people. It has to be like an overflow system. So it's important to know who needs you, who is your audience, who is your target audience. Why do they need you? It has to go back to your why, to your curiosity, to your passion, because that's what will continue fueling you. And lastly, again, as I said, like, who do you need? You're not just in this world to be by yourself. So to bring this all together, as I mentioned 6 P's, which are the key ingredients to your personal brand. And I've listed them here. So if you want to take another picture, if you want to take a screenshot, and I've bucketed them into recognizing, communicating, and presenting your personal brand. So again, recognizing, it's about going back to your roots. Who are you? Who do you, when you look in the mirror, who do you see? Without talking about your employer or what you've achieved or how many awards you have, who are you? It's important to just strip yourself of all of those, because there can be a time, there's so many things that can easily just fall away, but you're still left with yourself. So it's important to understand, like, who are you? Go back to your roots. And ultimately, once you set a foundation on that, you know that it's steady because you know who you are. And that's ultimately what you're portraying to the world. So it's about understanding your value as well. If I didn't understand that, my international experience, my atypical background was my superpower, I could not use that as, the value that I would bring to an organization. As I'm interning right now, I'm interning at Microsoft. I told them that as a global corporation, as a global organization, the value that I bring to you is a global perspective. I bring four countries when I come to you, when I sit at my desk every day. So it's important to understand your value. But again, it comes back to recognition. So you need to introspect. Communication is important. You have to figure out the message that you're trying to give, the value that you bring. You have to figure out how you want to communicate that. It might not be through LinkedIn. It might not be, through blogs or through written posts. It might be face-to-face interactions. It might be how you're even interacting with people on the street. It might be how you interact with strangers. It's important to understand what your message is and how you can communicate that to others. Exchange with empathy. Communication is about an exchange of information. How are you empathizing with people? As humans, we're all about storytelling. We're all about vulnerability. So it's important to understand that. And again, that comes back to your personality. It comes back to your passion. And lastly, presenting. So how do you present yourself to the world? Sometimes people are more focused on their performance, or like the performance of their personal brand, that they neglect just being present. They neglect that perhaps just the message that they share is enough, that maybe they don't need to do a webinar right now. So it's important to understand the ratio and the weight that you have for both of those. One of the quotes I like is that as we are liberated by our own fears, we subconsciously liberate others. So I think that's important, especially, and it reminds me to just use my voice, even if I'm afraid. Again, it goes back to being vulnerable. I remember when I was working at Morgan Stanley for my internship, and I voiced how my first day on the internship was I just felt so overwhelmed. And through sharing that story, so many people came to support me. And through sharing that vulnerability, I was able to liberate others from that vulnerability, to show them that they're not alone. So again, like recognizing your personal brand, recognizing your story, communicating that message, and then presenting that to the world is so important. So ultimately, with all of what I've just said, with the 6 P's that I've mentioned, it's time right now, with everything going digital, with everyone being online, with everyone being behind the screen. It's so difficult to make this facade. It's so difficult to be personal. But I really urge everyone, I challenge you to try to put the personal back into personal branding. It's so important. And it's not just about the numbers. It's not just about the statistics, but how are you impacting lives? How are you influencing people to be better, to do more, to be more? It's about the people. It's about the personal. So I just wanted to thank you all for coming and for listening to this. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. Please, I would love to hear your stories. Again, I'm all about the personal connection. I'm all about hearing people's story, because I think that's really what has made me me. It's not just about my story. I've now understood that it's not just about me. My personal brand is not just about me. It's about the stories I've heard, the stories I've collected from others. Whether I share that out or I keep that to myself, these are all the things that have made me me. It's the people that I've been surrounded by. It's the pain that I've gone through. It's my personality that makes me unique. So I just wanted to thank you again. Thank you for coming here. And I hope that through this session, you challenge yourself to think a bit deeper, to dig down deep, so that you can earth who you really are and present that to the world. So we have around 7 more minutes. I'm happy to take any questions, any comments that you have, and feel free to share that in the comments. Thank you. How often do I present? So funnily enough, I used to be very shy. With moving around a lot and growing up speaking German, English was not my first language. I grew up very shy. I didn't think I even had a voice, which is why I really want to urge people that if I could be here, speaking about my story, even sharing my story with people on the street, then who are you not to do the same? Who are you not to, make the same kind of impact or have the same kind of influence? Okay, so someone asked, what's your major and how do you see your path after graduation? So I'm majoring in information systems. I'm currently interning at Microsoft as a program manager. I graduate next year, and Honestly, for me, it's all about exploring. I have a lot of different interests. So I'm still like exploring, understanding like what field do I want to go in. I am also a person that does not just want to do one thing. So I will not just work my 9 to 5. I'm not just a student. I try to do more because I know that it's more than, you know, my status. It's more than my title. It's more than where I am currently. So the question about many people struggle with public speaking. What helped you to develop your skill? For me, I had to, and I know it sounds cliche, but I had to just start. I never saw myself as a public speaker. I never even, you know, thought that this is something that I wanted to do until I understood the power that my voice had. And I had to start small. I didn't say, you know, I wanted to be a public speaker and I want to speak to thousands of people. It started with just speaking in front of my class, like actually putting up my hand and saying, okay, I want to answer this question, or speaking up in a group project, or presenting to a class, or presenting to a student organization. I had to start small because I realized that if I could not be trusted with a small crowd of maybe 5 people, then I can't be trusted with 500 people. So I had to start small. I had to practice and just not put so much pressure on myself. And for me, as such a shy person, I see public speaking as even just speaking in class. So I hope that answers your question. Do you have any videos on YouTube? So most of my videos are on LinkedIn, actually. I do have a YouTube channel, but I only have one video there. Most of my videos are on LinkedIn. I interview other people. I actually had a session, a LinkedIn Live about personal branding and digging down to the roots. So please feel free to even message me. I can send you a few videos and any other resources that could be helpful to the university. So one question I see here, some people think they do not have a story to tell or do not have an interesting background. What advice do you have for them? So again, something that I felt a lot of pressure for was feeling like I needed to have an interesting story. Now, I told you about my different backgrounds. Would you believe me if I told you that I did not think that that was an interesting story? But a lot of people that hear, you know, my different interests or my different backgrounds or the different places I've lived, they're like, wow, like you're so unique. I did not think so. So when I realized that if I didn't think that I had an interesting background, what about other people? So for me, it wasn't necessarily putting the pressure on myself that, oh, I need to have a fabulous story, one that wows people. I just started to share the different experiences I've had. I talked about my experiences in kindergarten in Germany. I talked about how I had to force myself to learn English from you know, speaking German for all of my life. So it's not about putting so much pressure on yourself to say, oh, I don't have an interesting story. You just have to share your experiences. It's not your responsibility to tell people that you have an interesting story. It's the audience, it's whoever receives that story that can decide if it's interesting or not. But don't put that pressure on yourself to say that I need to have this, I need to have that. Just share your story, just share your experience, just share what you have gone through. Again, as I said, it's your personality that comes through at the end of the day. Share your quality, share the pain that you've gone through, and that's ultimately what brings your story. Yes, I do coach. I do hold sessions, specific sessions on personal branding on LinkedIn. So please do message me on LinkedIn. I would be happy to share your story, to hear your story, and to help you in any way that I can. We have 2 more minutes, so let me see what other questions I can get to. Yeah, so not necessarily a question, but I guess like a comment about using personal branding to look for a job. That is, I have had 6 internships in the 4 years I've been in college. It has all been because of my personal brand. It's all not necessarily in like an official way, but it's just how I've been able to carry myself, how I've been able to understand the value I have, and how I present myself in my interviews, in my applications. So it's important to understand that your personal brand is not just, you know, an official thing that you say that you have because you have a LinkedIn account. It's just who you are. As I said, it's not about what you do, it's who you are. So when it comes to looking for a job, you have to present who you are, what you can bring to the table. Thank you guys. Okay, there's 1 more minute, but just to close off, thank you so much for joining this session. And again, please do reach out to me. You can see my name, Blessing Adogame. I'm happy to talk with anyone. I'm happy to book a session with anyone. Please do reach out. Let me know what you enjoyed from this session so that I could also get feedback and see what I can do better. But I really appreciate you guys. Thank you for the comments. Thank you for engaging. And I hope that you will continue to foster that personal, into your personal branding. So thank you so much.